We're in the early and cold, wintry part of the off season right now, so I hope you're all staying warm and staying safe. And to help you get through it, we're going to go through some early 2026 rankings again. I'm John Macri, joined as always by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nathan Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we are looking at Nate's early quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2026 season. Just the top five for each for now, just to kind of wet your beaks a bit and think about something before the season to come. So, Nate, I hope you're mostly avoiding the wintry hell that so many of us are battling right now.
Haven't quite avoided it. Have over a foot of snow that I've had to deal with over the past 2 days. So that isn't the most fun thing in the world. But outside of that, it's an interesting time for quarterbacks and tight ends and rankings in general. Added all the rookies to my rankings this past week. So in the articles that I have up for quarterback, we'll talk about the top 5. But if you want to see my top 40, which includes rookies, that's up at pff.com right now. Tight ends will be going up next week. And then we still don't know who the offensive coordinator or offensive play caller is going to be for nearly half the league, at least over a quarter of the league. We've got a lot of head coaches who have signed, but a lot of them are defensive-minded head coaches, so we still don't know what the offense is going to look like. And that definitely impacts a lot of the players we're talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. Still definitely plenty to sort out here early in this part of the off season. But we should get a better idea. And obviously we'll do these rankings again, later on in the off season as well, and look at how things might have changed, what guys maybe moved up in the ranks, guys that moved down perhaps, and then, a better idea for some of the offensive outlooks. But I think this is still a good exercise to do, at this point in the season, just kind of get a feel for who these top guys might be. And then I think, we'll start with the quarterbacks here, but even the tight ends, like I think, for the most part, when we're looking at the very top of the rankings, I think a lot of those guys most likely not going to change too dramatically, right? But, especially number one, probably at each of these positions. But we will probably have some movement. So we'll see how things differ as we go through the season. But like Nate said, he's got his ranking articles over on the website right now. You can check those out. Tight ends, like you said, I think is coming out next week, but quarterbacks is out there. He's got early rookie rankings out there as well. So you can check those out. If you want to check out anything else over on pff.com, any locked articles, player grades, any of that kind of stuff, the PFF big board for NFL rookie draft, all of that stuff can be accessed with a PFF Plus subscription. And if you want to get 25% off of that PFF Plus subscription, you can use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off. So let's get into it here, Nate. We'll like I said, we'll start with the quarterback rankings first. And like I said, there'll be future episodes where we cover even more of these guys. But for now, since it's still only January, we'll begin with the top 5, potentially the guys who, like I said, are least likely to change dramatically as we get even closer to the season. So let's start at QB1, which I feel has the best chance to stay this way all off season long. Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills.
Oh, yeah. Allen has been either the number 1, 2, or 3 quarterback for the last 6 or so years. That hasn't changed. He's been a better passer than all of the other rushing quarterbacks. He's been a better runner than all the other passing quarterbacks. So that combination of passing and running has made him pretty unstoppable. He's also been elite in terms of rushing touchdowns in recent seasons. They aren't just at the 1 yard line. Some of them are at the 1 yard line, but plenty of them are just anywhere in the red zone. He'll scramble and score touchdowns. So that has helped him stay above all the other quarterbacks outside of the quarterbacks who are hottest that year. So Allen, I think, is the clear number 1 option. We'll see what happens with his receivers this year. It sounds like they should want an upgrade. They had a rotation of guys throughout the entire season. Dalton Kincaid at tight end, second straight year he's dealt with injuries throughout the entire season and played through them. Hopefully Kincaid can have a healthy season. So if anything, we could expect better things out of Allen as a passer if he can get some better options out there. The one big question mark is who's going to be his head coach, who's going to be his offensive coordinator. We still don't know that. That's going to be true for all of the rushing quarterbacks we're talking about today. We don't know who their play caller is going to be this season. But with Allen, the big thing is with his rushing, he scores all those touchdowns, and it's hard to think of a coach that would get him to not want to scramble when he has a chance of scoring. So it's unlikely that's going to change. And if anything, it might be a more pass-heavy head coach compared to what they had. They became a fairly run-heavy team, which hurt a number of Allen's stats this year. It just didn't really matter for fantasy because he has all that rushing production to make up for the lack of passing attempts.
Yeah, he's been, like you said, he's been amazing. as consistent as you get. Like you said, basically he's finished no worse than QB2 since 2020. He's been unreal so far. And yeah, he's getting older, but still has been like very healthy. He's avoided major injuries. So, that maybe could mean he's due or he'll regress. It also means that he doesn't have those concerns kind of coming into this off season that could really affect his 2026 season too much. And like you said, Nate, I'm with you. I think there is reason to believe that next year could be better, because if you look at that receiving core that he's had over these past two seasons, it's arguably been like the worst of his career, right? And if you're looking for ways to upgrade this roster, which I can't imagine isn't at the forefront of the Bills management minds, like considering another early playoff exit, right? I think the receiving core has to be a priority. And obviously Dalton Kincaid being healthy and playing a full-time role will help, but we're talking about, Khalil Shakir leading the team in targets in back-to-back seasons. And no disrespect to Shakir, like I like him as a player, but he's not wide receiver one on pretty much any other team, right? And Keon Coleman caught some strays already this offseason from management as a former first round pick that they obviously had hopes for, and he has not looked the part. And then it's the tight ends, right? It's Kincaid and Knox and guys like Josh Palmer and a band of kind of misfits there. So if I'm the Bills, which I'm not, but what do I know? But if I'm looking for a reason to remain like kind of optimistic about Josh Allen as QB1, is that I think this team will have to make some kind of move to greatly improve the weapons at Allen's disposal, whether that's a trade or a free agent signing or drafting a wide receiver, whatever the case may be. But again, just keeping in mind, like his best QB1 seasons were when he had high end wide receiver one like Stephon Diggs. So maybe there's some way to get someone who can fill that role. We'll see what happens here. But anyways, on to QB2 now, Nate, and it's another familiar name among the top fantasy scorers every year, which is Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. What gave him the edge over some of the other non-Josh Allen options right now?
Hertz has mostly been the most consistent of the other options. In the article, it is a tiered ranking list. Allen is alone in tier one. Hertz already starts tier two, so I expect at least a couple rounds difference in terms of ADP between these quarterbacks. Hertz has been top 8 in fantasy points per game each of the last 5 seasons. He's the only other quarterback outside of Allen who's done that. We've seen a lot of changes in who the top 8 quarterbacks are year after year. Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes have been the only other ones that have been remotely consistently near the top. And both of them, there's some concerns about them this year. And even Hurts, there's some concerns of just last season wasn't as good as previous seasons. We still don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. It feels like it should be a job that a lot of people want because you have Hurts and Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but a lot of people who have interviewed there have already taken jobs elsewhere. So we'll see what happens with the Philadelphia offensive coordinator. Ideally, whoever it is able to figure out what was going wrong with the offense and find ways to fix it. But we don't know if that's going to happen for sure. We also know that Hurts, a decent amount of his production was from the 1 yard line. Before it was tush pushes. Now they found creative ways to get the ball to Dallas Goedert, which Goedert's a free agent. So hopefully those 1 yard touchdowns are still from Hurts and not hands off to Saquon Barkley, because that could hurt Hurts' production. So we'll see what happens. But I think Hurts, because of his dependability so far and really his rushing production, puts him ahead of everyone else. Because if you look at quarterbacks who have had at least 80 fantasy points from rushing, Hurts has had it each of the past 5 seasons. Allen has had it each of the past 5 seasons. There's only 10 other instances of quarterbacks doing that over the past 5 seasons. Jackson, the only one doing it at any level of consistency, but Jackson wasn't able to do it last year. So for me, a lot of it is that rushing production that Hurts has had that puts him ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we talked about the consistency of Allen and yeah, Hurts for sure. Like he's been one of the most consistent performers at the position, kind of regardless of how he's viewed from, an NFL and like passer perspective. He's mostly been among the very best fantasy quarterbacks, right? And this year, like it wasn't great. We know that there were some duds this year, and part of that was like the drop off in rushing touchdowns, which was nearly cut in half from like the previous 3 seasons that we've seen. And yeah, he had more passing touchdowns, which was great, but not as valuable as some of those rushing touchdowns, right? So there were obviously, I think, problems with this Philly offense in 2025 where they just weren't what they were in 2024. And we'll see if they can ever get back to that. But they have at least made one move towards that in firing Kevin Patullo this offseason. He's a one and done as their offensive coordinator, but they are still looking for someone to fill that role and ideally bring them back to that kind of offensive glory of 2024 when, Kellen Moore was there. And then they have to kind of make sure that AJ Brown is good to go for 2026 too, because he didn't end the season on a high note with the team. And, they also can't easily move on from him. So they have to find a way to make sure, wide receiver one gels with QB one at the very least, because he averaged just 67 yards per game compared to 83 yards per game last season. So his production was way down as well, which obviously doesn't help Jalen Hurts. So I don't know, for me, like, there's still question marks about Jalen Hurts. Like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if he finished as a top 6 quarterback again, but they do kind of have to bounce back to what they were in 2024 for him to be significantly higher than that. But even in 2024, he was, I think, QB6, or yeah, somewhere around there in an ideal offense. So I'll probably have him a little lower than QB2, but honestly, like, I have a hard time deciding who to put ahead of him, because even with these next 3 guys, Nate, like, there isn't any obvious candidates for that spot anymore. So maybe QB2 is the right spot. We'll see, but we'll talk through some of these other guys here as well. But yeah, speaking of those other 3, let's move to the rest of the top 5 quarterbacks right now. And at QB3, you have Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. So tell us about what's got Joey B jumping up the ranks this year.
Yeah, I agree. We're in a weird spot with quarterbacks this year because it had been the Russian quarterbacks who have consistently been near the top. And then we had a bunch of the Russian quarterbacks either deal with injuries or just not quite get there this past year. So Joe Burrow, who is not a Russian quarterback, goes all the way up to quarterback 3. The big thing with him is he's had the injuries a lot in the recent season. So this last year, he missed a lot of the middle part of the season. He was at least quarterback 3 from weeks 13 to 18. So he did have elite fantasy production at the end of the season. Also was quarterback 3 in 2024. Gets his wide receivers back because everyone signed long-term contracts a year ago. They decided to keep the coaching staff. So a lot of the offense should remain the same. A lot of the things around him should remain the same. So as long as he stays healthy, he should be one of those top 3 or 4 quarterbacks. The problem is he hasn't been able to stay healthy. The offensive line hasn't been great. They don't have all that much cap space or opportunity to improve the offensive line because they also have to improve the defense a lot. So we'll see what their off season looks like. But he, again, seems like one of the safer quarterbacks to be near the top. But this might be a situation where you might want to wait for a quarterback this year based on everything going on at quarterback, because there is a lot of depth at the position, just not quite as much depth near the top among these quarterbacks that we're talking about, because we're talking about just as much the problems we have with them right now as much as why you want to draft them.
Yeah, that's a good point, for sure. And with Joe Burrow too, like, I love Joe Burrow, easily one of my favorite players in the leagues. But like you said, I just want to be able to watch him, drop back and not get killed like Andrew Luck every time he's trying to pass, right? Because as far as pure passers in the league, like, I think Burrow is as good as anyone, and he is arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league to throw to kind of maximize that ability as well. So yeah, I think there's absolutely, like, no question he has that top 3 potential. We've already seen it from him for fantasy. And, if he can push for that 5,000 yards passing, 40 plus touchdowns, like, if he's healthy, that should be the expectation with him. So yeah, the main thing though is, like you said, if he stays healthy, that offensive line, slash himself, right? He's part of the reason that he also gets hit a fair bit. He holds onto the ball, tries to make some plays a little bit longer, but it's becoming a concern, at least as the injuries start to pile up. He missed a chunk of time at the end of his rookie season, chunk of time in 2023, another chunk of time in 2025. So I guess the silver lining here is that it hasn't been a concern 2 years in a row. So maybe we get that fully healthy season. I hope we do. But yeah, injury concerns aside, because that O-line is not good, like you said. But Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow are very, very good, and we've seen them combine to overcome those issues. And I am with you in that I am going to bank on them doing that again in 2026. Now at QB 4 and 5, Nate, you have reignited the Drake versus Lamar rivalry in the form of Lamar Jackson versus Drake May as to who will be taken next. And much like in the rap world, Lamar gets the edge here for you in the ranks. So I hope you get that reference. And tell us what's got Lamar coming in at QB 4 for you.
Yeah, I went with Lamar over Drake, both in terms of their music, but also in terms of the quarterbacks. Lamar, it's interesting because he didn't quite have that Russian production this past year. He's probably the highest risk, highest reward quarterback on the list because we know what he can do. If he's at his best, he's had two of the best fantasy seasons by a quarterback of all time, one of them being just 2 years ago. So we've seen him have that elite production. He's another one of the Russian quarterbacks that we're talking about that we don't know who's going to be his offensive play caller. And I think that's probably going to impact Jackson more than it's going to impact the other quarterbacks because we don't know what this offense is going to look like. A lot of the players that make this the Ravens offense, their fullback, two of their three tight ends, all free agents. So we could see this become more of a pass heavy team, more of a team that uses 11 personnel a lot. Maybe they add a wide receiver in there. Maybe we see Jackson be more of a passer, or we could see a more run heavy approach if they want to continue trying to get the most out of Derrick Henry. Maybe they re-sign some of the players. So we don't know what this offense is going to look like, but we do know that his rushing production was basically cut in half this year. We've seen his rushing attempts per game decrease a little bit over time, but there was a dramatic decrease to only 5.2 attempts per game this past year compared to 8.2 the year before. So I would expect, regardless of what this offense looks like, for his rushing production to rebound at least a little bit. But when you compare him to some of the other rushing options in the league, we have Jaden Daniels and Jackson Dart. Both of them have also dealt with injuries. Both of them have shown sparks of being this potential top 5 quarterback, but we haven't seen it over the long term whatsoever. So at least for me right now, when I'm trying to decide between him and some of those other rushing quarterbacks, I'm probably putting a little more faith in Lamar Jackson just because he's done it so many times before, even though there's clear signs that maybe he won't be able to get to that point again compared to some of these younger quarterbacks who have shown it on a small sample size. But even with Daniels, we didn't really see it at all this past season of the things that he was doing during his rookie season. So hopefully he gets back there, but we don't know that for sure. And Dart, we saw multiple injuries during his rookie season, which is also fairly concerning. And his passing grades weren't the greatest. So maybe if he doesn't do as well as a passer, maybe he isn't the quarterback of the future of New York. So it'll be interesting to see among these Russian quarterbacks, but I think all three of them probably the most high risk, high reward options you can be picking for your starting quarterback next year.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I think the high reward for Lamar is the big thing here because we know what, he has that QB1 overall upside. And I was somebody that ended up being really disappointed by him in 2025. I obviously not the only one, but he was QB1 for me heading into the year. Josh Allen was QB2. Obviously, with hindsight, that should have been flipped. But even if it was, like, Lamar still would have been a letdown after finishing as QB1 overall in 2024. He looked like a legitimate, MVP candidate. He had the elite passing grade. It was like a career high in that regard. I think it was 93.3, if I remember correctly. And yeah, like the rushing attempts were down, but he was what he was doing as a passer, it was looking like it could be the new norm for him after going back-to-back years of 4,000 plus yards passing, right? And a new career high year. So it just wasn't the case. Last year was basically a complete disaster for those of us who went into 2025 with Lamar as QB1 after those first 3 weeks, that is, because weeks 1 to 3 was the Lamar we had hoped for, but then he got hurt. And even when he returned in week 9, he was just never the same, right? Like you said, the rushing numbers were down. I think he was playing through a lot of the injury stuff as well. He even missed week 17. So on the chance that you did need him for fantasy finals, he wasn't even there for us. But I think it would take a lot for 2026 to be significantly worse than 2025 for Lamar, to the point where he can't find a top 5, silver lining for fantasy. And I'd be willing to take a shot on the upside with him. And even coming off the disappointment that was 2025, it'll just kind of depend on who the other options are in this draft range as well. And, how I feel kind of about the value behind him. Because like you said, there's some good quarterback depth this year in probably going later in drafts. That'll kind of determine just how much Lamar shares I have this season. But I am fine with him definitely as a top 5 pick again. All right, and then rounding out our top five, I alluded to it earlier there. It's Drizzy Drake May, the Super Bowl bound Drake May, Nate, coming in as QB5 for you.
May had one of the best sophomore seasons we've seen out of a quarterback in the 20 years we've been collecting data. Had a PFF grade over 90, which is something we've only seen out of Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert. All of them continue to have success throughout their careers, or at least their short careers for some of them so far. So that's been good to see. He does have some rushing production, which definitely helps him. Not quite at the same level as some of the other quarterbacks we talked about today, but that at least helps him a little bit, but also hurts him that he's not the same rusher that some of these other quarterbacks are. He had a lot of passing stats that are probably going to regress at least a little bit this year because they were so extremely good. And anytime you have players at those extremes, you tend to see at least some regression. 8.9 yards per attempt, which led the league, 6.3 touchdown rate, 1.6% interception rate. All of those probably going to regress at least a little bit. We'll see if the Patriots make any moves at wide receivers to improve the wide receiver room next year, which could help his numbers or at least help them not regress all that much. But I think it's a situation where it's also important to note he had the schedule that was fairly easy for a quarterback, but anytime he did face one of those tougher opponents at quarterback, he still put up good numbers throughout the regular season. It was just basically one bad game against Buffalo, but any quarterback's going to have one bad game over the course of the season. So even the stuff about the schedule, I'm not as concerned about. There just are plenty of other quarterback options out there that we talked about before that it might be okay to wait a little bit. There were the two Russian quarterbacks that we mentioned before, guys like Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, who have just been consistently good passers with no rushing production, so that hurts their ceiling, but both of them had either MVP or close to MVP seasons as well this year. Brock Purdy's been consistently good regardless of his receiving options, so hopefully he has better receiving options. Patrick Mahomes hasn't been mentioned among the quarterbacks in the rankings yet, but you can continue even going down to quarterbacks ranked between 13 and 18, and you can be relatively comfortable with them. Younger quarterbacks like Bo Nix or Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert probably deserves to go up the rankings at least a little bit now that he has a new offensive coordinator. But a lot of guys that you can be comfortable in your starting lineup if the matchup is right. So we'll see what the ADP ends up for guys like Jackson and May. But if the ADPs end up too high, then I probably won't end up with too much of them and would probably prefer just drafting two quarterbacks later and just going with whoever has the better matchup that week.
Yeah, it makes sense. And for May, we've talked about him a few times now this offseason already, because his progression to have this kind of breakout season has obviously been such a big deal. And, now he's in the Super Bowl and all eyes are on him again, but that's all translated to fantasy as well as we could have possibly hoped. We talked about it, but I had high hopes for May as a breakout this year. I had him as QB 13. That was a little ahead of consensus and believed he had that top 12 potential for sure. But QB2 overall was not in the range of outcomes that I expected this year. That's for sure. But that's where he finished. And part of that was that so many of the other quarterbacks were injured, because the threshold for QB2 this year, which was, I think, 337 points, that's the lowest it's been since 2019 when Dak finished as QB2 ahead of Jameis Winston and his 337 points. But that's also, I think, total production that's kind of reasonable to expect from May as well. There's probably going to be someone who hits big and, gives us closer to that 380-ish points again for a, more typical QB2 finish. But I think in that 350 point range for May again is certainly doable if he doesn't take a big step back. But like you said, a really impressive sophomore season. And I think, all signs point to a player who could be a long-term star in the league, because I think it'll be much harder to take another big leap forward. So I'm not ranking him, where he finished makes sense, but as long as he doesn't greatly regress, I think, top 5 still makes perfect sense. But like you said, there are so many other great options as well, probably going in that 6 to probably all the way to 18, like you said, range of the quarterback. So we'll just kind of depend on who you want to value and where you want to spend your draft capital on the quarterback position. All right, before we go on to the tight ends, because that will wrap up their quarterbacks. Like I said, we're just doing the top 5 today. You could check out Nate's ranking, which has the top 40 quarterbacks on the website now, if you want to see where the rest of the names are ranked. But before we go on to the tight ends, I want to let everybody know that this Our game plan of the week is presented by Western and Southern Financial Group, a game plan for your financial future. And like we've been doing this offseason, where we're planning ahead for the 2026 season right now, we're looking at a lot of the early rankings for the different positions. We talked about running backs, we talked about quarterbacks, we're talking about tight ends here in a second. Just prepping and getting ready for that potential 2026 championship as early as possible. It's never too early to get that game plan set in motion. So that's what our game plan is all about when it comes to the fantasy offseason. But you too should make sure that you have a game plan, whether in beginning very early prep for 2026 championship or for life in general. Just like every team win starts with a great game plan, your future should too. With life insurance built like a championship roster, Western and Southern helps protect you and your family so you could focus on winning today, knowing tomorrow is covered. Whether you're just starting out, building your dynasty, or looking to lock in long-term protection, their coverage options are designed to match your game plan. Visit westernsouthern.com/PFF to get your free life quote and start building your financial game plan today. Western and Southern, built to win, backed by over 130 years of helping people protect what matters most. Okay, so now let's move on to the tight end rankings. Again, kind of same idea. We'll cover the top 5 here. And also very much like the quarterback position, Nate, very little chance that the number 1 overall player in the ranks, Trey McBride, changes at this point or any point this offseason.
I could see at least it being possible for him to go down to 2. He obviously had a historic season last year, most receptions by a tight end all time, over 100 points more than any other tight end. But a lot of things went right in order for that to happen. The Cardinals lost their top 2 running backs very early in the season with James Conner and Trey Benson, so they really didn't focus too much on the run game over the rest of the year. At wide receiver, they lost basically everyone outside of Michael Wilson. Their top 6 or 7 wide receivers on the depth chart outside of him all dealt with injuries late in the season. So they had to really dig deep down the depth chart, often starting players who they added to the practice squad in the middle of the season. So that was not an ideal situation for their wide receivers. So that also helped McBride a ton have that really high target rate because they didn't have any other options in the offense outside of Michael Wilson. So they should focus at least a little bit on wide receiver in the offseason. They should have healthy running backs next year, so we shouldn't see Trey McBride have such a dominant season, but McBride still is ahead of basically everyone else because he's among the best tight ends in the NFL. PFF receiving grade is fairly highly correlated with fantasy production for tight ends because tight ends are a little unique in that teams usually only have one good player. They don't have a bunch of players competing for playing time like they do at a running back or wide receiver competing for targets. So McBride is one of the few tight ends with the PFF receiving grade over 90 over the past few seasons. Brock Bowers and George Kittle are the other ones, with Kittle dealing with an injury. We don't know when he's going to start playing this year or if he's going to play at all this year. So that leaves McBride and I'll spoil the next one, Bowers, as the top 2 because their PFF grade is so much higher than everyone else. But we don't know who's going to be the head coach for the Cardinals. We don't know who's going to be calling plays for them. We don't know who's going to be the quarterback for the Cardinals. We don't know how the coach is going to handle the wide receiver room because at the very least, they probably need an upgrade at wide receiver 3, even if they stick with Wilson and Marvin Harrison as the top 2 wide receivers. They probably at least want to address the 3rd wide receiver spot. So we could see more competition for targets. We could see a change in philosophy in the offense. There's a lot that could change with McBride, but regardless of all those changes, would at least expect him to be in the top 2.
Okay. So there you go. So maybe a little question about him potentially holding on to that tight end 1 spot. And you're right. There's definitely, some questions, right? Because Kyler Murray talked about, a potential trade candidate. We don't know who the coaching staff, it's going to look like exactly there as far as, offensive scheme and all that goes. But yeah, I mean, this past year was about as dominant as a tight end season as we could see, right? Like it was very similar to that kind of prime Travis Kelce production where he was putting up, 100 more points than the next closest tight end. So if the outlook, I guess, for Trey McBride remains the same, where you're thinking maybe he can deliver that same kind of production again, like, is there a world where you could see him being somebody that, maybe even moves up into like being a 1st round pick, right? Like where we saw with Kelce for during his prime tight end years. And I think we came off that pretty quickly, right? Because Kelce obviously was putting up ridiculous numbers, especially as far as touchdowns go. But the fact was, like, ADP wise, there was a time where Travis Kelsey was a first round pick, and a lot of the times, even the second round tight ends still felt a little too expensive when there's been other comparable cheaper options, like we both had with McBride over Bowers this past year. But since we still kind of don't know what the Raiders and the Brock Bowers outlook is going to be yet as well, we have a lot of, some of these other year two tight ends who are great, but still not locked in, kind of proven assets. And then kind of some of the aging familiars like Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson, Kelsey and Kittle, if they play this year, Goddard, like those types. So McBride, we kind of know what he is. Like, as far as, like you said, he's pretty much locked into that top two, a very high end pick of the bunch. And is that sense of security, I guess, as I'm asking, and the advantage at the position, is that enough to maybe push him into that round one territory at any point, do you think?
I think it's at least possible. I'd probably, because the rookie tight end class was so good, I wouldn't be surprised if people would rather wait for a tight end rather than pay that early of a price for one. So I'm not sure we'll get a round one tight end this year, but well, if one of these tight ends ends up in a really good situation, if they get a coach that we're really excited about, if they don't have much competition at wide receiver, if the quarterback situation ends up being better than expected, I could see that happening. But it'll be hard to hit on all of those, especially this late in the process when so many other teams already have their head coach.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like you said, I'm with you. I really like a lot of the year two tight ends as well. Like, just betting on better seasons from them, and we'll talk about them. Spoilers here in a little bit, but yeah, I'm with you. I think Trey McBride right now, tight end one for sure. After what he did last year, that it's hard to kind of deny him that. But with him and the next name, there's questions about what their offenses are going to look like. So yeah, we'll move on here to tight end two, the aforementioned Brock Bowers, who will likely have a rookie quarterback throwing him the ball, but we don't know what the coaching staff's going to look like. So scheme, all that kind of stuff that did hurt him this year a little bit are still a possibility. But talent wise, I don't think there's much question that Bowers deserves to be in that top two conversation.
Yeah, Bowers has been very consistent despite the quarterback situation. Has averaged 14.5 receiving PPR points per game in each of the past two seasons, which only 10 players have done at either wide receiver or tight end. And Bowers and McBride, the two tight ends who have done it, the other 8 players are wide receivers. And all of the other players to do it have had much better play at quarterback, even McBride with the quarterback situation they've had in Arizona. Bowers, the Raiders have had a 57 PFF passing grade over the past 2 seasons with all their quarterbacks combined, which is third worst among teams, where all the other teams that have had consistent receivers have been better. So we at least hope that this is going to be a better situation at quarterback going forward. We have seen rookies struggle at times early in their rookie season, so it'll be hard to know exactly when they'll develop the chemistry that they need and everything. So we'll see how that goes. There's also the question of competition for targets. I would expect the Raiders even more so to be looking for help at wide receiver this year. They didn't have much consistency at the wide receiver position or much production in general. They drafted 2 rookies last year. Neither of them had a ton of production this year. Tyler Lockett was one of their top wide receivers at the end of the year, and that's probably not going to be the case this year. So Trey Tucker, the only other option they have at wide receiver. So would not be surprised if 2 of their top 3 wide receivers next year are not currently on the roster. So we'll see how much competition they have at wide receiver. We'll see what the philosophy is of the offensive play caller. It'll be interesting because they do have Michael Mayer at tight end as well. So will this be a team that uses a ton of 12 personnel again? Will Mayer be part of the offense? With how much some teams have shifted to 13 personnel, will that be a big part of this offense? We'll see how things end up shaking out with the Raiders offense. But right now it's pretty interesting in that both players are so many unknowns that it's basically just whichever tight end you like better in general, because we don't know how they're going to be used going forward or a lot of things around them. So right now I trust McBride more just because he's had that production recently, has not had the injury concerns that Bowers had this past season. But if Bowers appears to be in a better situation than McBride, then I wouldn't be surprised if Bowers ends up ahead of McBride.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And yeah, I mean, look, Bowers obviously missed a big chunk of time this year. Like you said, that offense was it was abysmal. So it's another situation where, everything that could go wrong for Bowers to not be tight end one basically happened. And even finishing as tight end 2 or 3, where we had him ranked, was impossible considering all that, right? So this year, I can't imagine it's worse, barring another injury and a major one. But if he's healthy for a full season, then it's really hard to bet against him being one of the league's best tight ends again. I think best case scenario is that whoever they bring in as head coach ends up being a strong offensive mind, and Fernando Mendoza hits the ground running in year one, and has that kind of offensive rookie of the year type season, while feeding Bowers as his top target. Like, that should at least be top 3 production. But I'm hopeful for him either way, Bowers, that he can hit that mark. So yeah, hopeful for Bowers in year 3. But speaking of young tight ends that we're hopeful to have a great season and potentially a true breakout season, for Colston Loveland, who you have as tight end 3 right now, Nate.
Yeah, when I did my initial rankings for 2026, Loveland wasn't here, but he has been elite over the past couple weeks when he's played multiple games over 90 receiving yards. If you combine the regular season and the playoffs, he had the most games of 90 plus receiving yards for a tight end this season. So Loveland had a slow start, had that one good game against the Bengals in the middle of the year, started to play a little bit better throughout the season, but it's really been these last couple weeks where he pretty well secured himself as the number 3 tight end, in my opinion, for next season. With how well he played, he was a top 10 draft pick, which is pretty rare for a tight end, so we expected big things out of him. He was grading well throughout the season, even though his target rate wasn't quite as high as we would like to see, but ended up grading fairly well over those past couple weeks as well. So strong playoff performance led to an 86.2 receiving grade on the season, which was the best grade among all tight ends with at least 75 targets. So he's graded just as good as the other elite tight ends this past year. We know who his quarterback's going to be. We know who his offensive coordinator is going to be. The only problem with him right now is that we know he has more competition for targets at the wide receiver position. We know the team also has running backs that they like. So the only problem is that there's a few too many players, but it would not be at all surprising to me if Loveland ends next season as the overall number 1 tight end. If the Bears offense is playing better than the other 2 offenses, so that leads to Loveland scoring more touchdowns than the other 2 tight ends.
Yeah, he has been, I think, amazing, especially recently. I was looking at kind of the splits this week, and he's played 18 games this season, right, including the playoffs. So if we cut his season in half to kind of view the splits, you can see a clear tight end 1 caliber player in that second half of the year, right? So from weeks 1 to 11, the start of the year, first 9 games, 36.6 receiving yards per game, 3.7 targets per game, 21 routes per game, right? So nothing really, spectacular there. He wasn't really utilized a ton, but then the 9 games after that, and including the playoffs, he went up to 64.1 yards per game, 8.1 targets per game on 30.2 routes per game. So I think anyone who has watched football over the last month or so knows about Loveland's potential, right? Which is why he's already in that kind of top 4 range in these rankings, as well as most dynasty rankings. And it's hard to disagree when you also consider the elite prospect profile coming out of Michigan. I think Loveland is going to be probably the most popular breakout candidate at the position heading into 2026, if I had to bet. But yeah, he's been excellent. I think he's deserving of a top 5 spot here, just in kind of projecting his talent going forward. So yeah, top 3 definitely makes sense for me. So yeah, I think, Colston Loveland probably going to be at the forefront of everyone's mind heading into 2026. There's another top 5 tight end who might have been a bit forgotten recently since he's been injured, but another young player who also delivered an impressive rookie year in his own right a few seasons ago. That's Sam Laporta, who comes in at tight end 4 for you, Nate.
Yeah, led all tight ends in his rookie season and has at least been in the top 10 each of the past 2 seasons. We know he's very talented. He has an 86.9 PFF receiving grade over the past 3 seasons, which is 4th best among all tight ends. So he's graded very well. He's just had the problem of 1, the injuries, but 2, the competition for targets. He has Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams at wide receiver, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery at running back. So he's had to deal with more competition than most tight ends do, where Trey McBride hasn't had a ton of competition. Brock Bowers hasn't had a ton of competition. So even though Laporta is close to the same caliber of player of those players, it's just been he hasn't been able to get the targets because he hasn't been as big of a part of the offense because they have too many other good parts of the offense. There is good news that could change a little bit this year. They did add Drew Petzing as offensive coordinator. He had been the offensive coordinator of the Arizona Cardinals the past 3 years when Trey McBride had by far the most targets among tight ends. Even before that, he was spending time with the Cleveland Browns, where the Browns, even though they had different tight ends at times, had the fourth most targets to tight ends during his time with the Browns. So he is very used to offenses throwing a ton to tight ends. It's unclear how much of this offense will be Petzing's offense versus Dan Campbell's offense. We'll see. So there's a chance that this might not actually change all that much, but if it's anything, it's good news for Laporta. So there's a chance Laporta could jump up in targets because of the change in offensive coordinator. But I think as long as he stays healthy, he is a relatively safe pick to be among the top half of the tight end ones this year.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I think, he had a kind of up and down here right before he got hurt, which I think, like you said, it's kind of the nature of that Lions offense when you have so many different options who could go off on any given week. But through his first 8 games, he had 4 finishes inside the top 5 at the position, then the 4 finishes outside the top 20. So, week 10, I think when he got hurt, he was already it was tight end 10 for that week. So that was kind of the trend breaker there. But I could easily see a similar situation, but I'm with you. I think you could see a better season as well. Like you said, bringing in Drew Petzing as offensive coordinator, because through those first 10 weeks, like, he was tight end 8 in PPR. I think obviously we've seen more from Sam Laporta before, and I think he can definitely improve. But yeah, the tight end position, man, it really does feel like it's in a good place, considering we have these young guys who are really hitting now, guys like Bowers and Loveland and Warren and Fannin and Laporta, even Kyle Pitts now. Like, there's this new crop of guys who are all going to be, I think, pushing for this, that tight end 1 to 5 range for the next several years. And I think Laporta is definitely in there. They might all be interchangeable year to year to an extent, which is kind of fun, but it makes ranking them a little tougher as we start splitting hairs for kind of what separates them. Because yeah, I do think they'll all be very close going forward. And I definitely think Laporta deserves to be in that conversation. And even a couple who aren't currently in this top 5 at the moment for sure as well. But yeah, there is one more, though, who did crack the top 5 that is part of that conversation for sure. My guy, Harold Fannin Jr., who finished as the PPR tight end 4 as a rookie, despite playing on a poor Cleveland offense and behind David Njoku for a lot of the year. Fannin's talent was undeniable, and now he's a fantasy star that we expected him to be coming out of the NFL draft, Nate. So Harold Fannin at tight end 5.
Yeah, I think this 5th spot is pretty competitive. I think tight end will be very different from quarterback this year, in that you'll probably want to invest in a tight end. I think there's a clear top 9 or so players. You can maybe argue 1 or 2 guys for that 10th spot. But I think because of that, you'll want to be one of those 9 or 10 teams that get one of those tight ends. And even then, you have George Kittle and Tucker Kraft coming back from injury. So even if you draft one of those tight ends, you'll probably want to invest in another one just in case they aren't ready for the start of the season, or we'll probably get more news about their injury throughout the offseason. But I think those are 2 of the tight ends that are in contention for this 5th spot. If we end up, or if we find out that they are healthy enough to maybe be ready for the start of the season, I think Kyle Pitts is also in the conversation, but he's a free agent. We don't know where he'll land, and that'll probably play a big part of where you end up drafting him, which really leaves either Fannin or fellow future sophomore tight end Tyler Warren. And for me, Fannin is ahead of Warren for a couple reasons. Fannin had a better receiving grade this past year, so he played better as a receiver. A 76.4 grade for Fannin, which was the 4th best among tight ends with at least 100 targets. So if you look at just the tight ends who are heavily targeted, Fannin was very good. Warren, 72 grade, so also fairly good, just not quite at the same level. And then also, at least right now, it appears that Warren will have more competition for targets again than Fannin. The Colts have Michael Pittman and Josh Downs still under contract. Alec Pierce is a free agent. The Browns, the only other player on their offense that had at least 350 receiving yards was Jerry Jeudy. Would not be surprised to see the Browns take a wide receiver in the first round of the draft. So maybe we see Fannin get a little bit more competition for targets. Another one where we don't know who the offensive play caller is going to be, so that could also influence things and how much they have a history of throwing to tight ends. So we'll see what happens there. A chance that could end up changing things between 5 and 6. Maybe we see Warren move up because of that. If the Browns invest heavily at wide receiver and have a coach that wants to throw to the wide receivers. But for now, Bannon, I think, is the better receiving option and has less competition for targets. Potentially know who his quarterback's going to be. Now Pro Bowl quarterback Stuart Sanders, so has a Pro Bowl quarterback thrown to him at the very least. But we'll see what happens throughout the offseason. But I think Bannon, at the very least, regardless of what happens at coach, at wide receiver, is very safe to be one of the starting tight ends for fantasy football this upcoming year.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, Pro Bowl quarterback shooter Sanders. Yeah, that's we'll see what happens there. But yeah, David Njoku was, he was in the lineup for Cleveland as well for those first 8 weeks or so, and a few weeks after that. And Fannin, it didn't seem to be a big issue for him. He was still the PPR tight end 7 over that stretch. And then when Njoku was out of the lineup, you combine all those weeks, he was like tight end 4, and that's where he finished on the year. Just led the team in targets, receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. He ranked in the top 6 among tight ends in all of those categories. And we can probably expect Njoku to hit free agency this offseason and kind of keep that runway clear for Fannin, like you said. So we'll see what the rest of the Browns offense looks like. But at the very least, I don't think it would be much of a surprise if Fannin leads the team in receiving metrics across the board again in year 2, considering how he hit the ground running in year 1 as a rookie. And just being a high profile receiving option coming out of the draft as well. I think he's been excellent so far through the first rookie season, but still lots more to go. And I think I would have him in this top 5 as well. I think he's been excellent. So that's the top 5 tight ends. Again, Nate will have out the full list of tight ends next week on the website, so you can check out the full list there. But yeah, for now, that's just a little taste. Like I said, we're going to kind of wet your beaks a little bit here. Top 5 quarterbacks, top 5 tight ends. So hopefully you all enjoyed that, but let us know who's in your top 5 as well, if there's any difference that you might have. But if you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please do leave a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And then Nate, please do let everybody know what you're working on that they can read at pff.com.
Sure. So as well as the articles we already mentioned, I have the Super Bowl rankings already up. So if you're in any kind of contest around the Super Bowl, have rankings for that. Also had Dynasty Rookie Top 60 go out this week. So if you're in the Dynasty League, interested to see what this draft class looks like, have one clear running back at the top and then a ton of wide receivers. This seems like a great wide receiver class. So I look forward to talking about those wide receivers over these next couple months as well, once we start talking more about some of these Dynasty players.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I know we're going to talk some rookie rankings here very shortly on the podcast, which will be a lot of fun to kind of get into these guys for the first time this offseason on the podcast. So be sure to check that out soon. For me on the website, I've written up dynasty assets that could see their values skyrocket coming out of the 2026 season. And then 2 separate articles covering catchable target rates for wide receivers and tight ends that could be used to identify some potential positive and negative regression candidates for this coming season as well. So that was fun to dive into. Again, those will all be out by the end of this week on pff.com. And then Nate and I will be back again next week covering probably the rookie rankings actually next week. So that'll be good. But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. And until next time, peace out.